are we enjoying spring so far? Everything's cool? This is actually a picture just from 2 days ago, I believe. It's Saskatchewan, just for the record. It's not Ontario, thankfully. But you see that little sign that's sticking up? You can't read it from where you are, perhaps, but it says Trans-Canada Highway. And that's actually what happened out west. So we can actually be very thankful that what we had, even though it was the first day of spring, was still a little weird. At least we can celebrate a little bit that spring is actually on the way. So happy Easter to you all. At least it's on its way, and we'll be thankful for some warm weather. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to just open your word, and again, we would just pray your blessing on it. We just ask that you would minister to our hearts, that you would make your word so clear. Father, we would understand the Christ and what he has done. To that end, we ask you would help us and teach us in Jesus' name. Amen. As I mentioned already, traditionally, this is Palm Sunday, but that would, if you'll allow me to put it this way, shorten our story significantly, because we only have now Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and it would be too much to cram in. So I have taken the liberty of sidestepping the fact that today is traditionally the day when we celebrate or remember that 1 week, this is the final week of Christ's life, that he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, symbolizing the Prince of Peace. But at any rate, we are going to take up our story. We began part 1 last week, and we talked about Jesus' arrest. So this morning we're going to look at part 2 of this story, and we're going to unfold the trial of Jesus. I don't know if you've looked at this at length, but I, for myself, will say I quite enjoyed looking at this for myself this week. You remember last week that Jesus made sure that his arrest was organized, if you will. He chose where it would be. He chose to pull his disciples out of the busyness of Jerusalem. He was the one who stepped forward and made sure that he was at the front. He made sure he protected his disciples. The whole way through, you'll recognize that Jesus was in control. That he was, in fact, not a victim in any sense. That everything that took place was entirely of God's design. If you listen carefully to the media of our age, they'll tell you that what took place in Jesus' arrest was ultimately just his own undoing. That he made himself some enemies, he got himself caught up in an insurrection, he tried to stir up some political trouble, he knew that the only way he would actually ever get a footing was to do things politically. He tried, it got caught up with him, caught him in the neck, and he ended up being crucified as a criminal. It wasn't until Paul came along that Paul began to, this is secular thinking, by the way, I'm not telling you the truth, I'm telling you what the world's telling you. It wasn't until Paul came along that he laid upon Jesus all the teachings of Jesus, and the whole myth around his resurrection took root and began to launch, and it wasn't until 50, 80, 60, 100 years after Jesus that really Christianity took off. That's what the secular thinking of our age is, and we'll tell you that in fact Jesus' arrest, his crucifixion, was just, in a sense, a human thing. It was anything but that. And we'll look at the evidence, if you will, this morning. As we look at the trial, you can only see that in fact that is anything but the case. Now I got to give you a bit of background and understanding on a few things here and there. I'm going to give you an overview of how things run through Jesus' trial. It's relatively, I don't want to say complex because it's fairly straightforward, but it can be mildly confusing. There are these turns and twists, and first it's here, then it's there, then it's this, now it's that, now it's over here, and if you don't follow it completely, it can be a little bit unsettling in your mind. Let me just give you a quick overview of how things went. They arrested Jesus. They brought him to Annas. They dealt with him there, and then they bring him to Caiaphas, who was the high priest. Caiaphas has his way with him, and then they need to bring Jesus to the Sanhedrin, because the Sanhedrin are the only ones who can actually pass a verdict on a capital crime. Now there are 2 sections of Jesus' trial. As you see listed there, there was a religious court. There were 3 religious trials that he went through. And then there is the secular court, the Roman court. Now the reason for that is because the Jewish people were under Roman rule. And although they lived by their own Jewish laws, they didn't have the right to carry out the fulfillment of those laws, especially in regard to capital crimes or capital punishment. They needed Rome's approval. In other words, it would kind of be like, to put it into our vernacular today, if there was a religious group within Canada, for example, that believed that if you committed adultery, it was worthy of death. And if your wife or your husband or whatever the case is caught in adultery and they pronounce death on you, under Canadian law, they are not legally allowed to go and proceed with putting that person to death. In order for their religious laws, religious desires to be fulfilled, they would have to come to the Canadian courts and deal with it on that level. And that's exactly the situation that's going on here. The Jewish people have their desires, but they know that it would be illegal for them to kill Jesus. So they have to get, if you will, the rubber stamp of the approval of the authorities at hand in order for them to not be committing a crime. And so Jesus has to go through a series of trials in a Roman court. And he comes before Pilate. Pilate, you know the story, isn't sure what to do. He sends him off to Herod. Herod doesn't find what he's looking for. He sends him back to Pilate. And this is how it goes. There are 6 trials, processes, if you will, in the arrest, the trial of Jesus. And when you read the Gospels, not all of the Gospels include all 6 pieces. So sometimes it can confuse your mind because you'll read the Gospel of Mark and you'll read one way, and you'll read John and he'll mention Annas, and you'll say, I didn't read about Annas. And you have to put all of them together and see the whole big picture. So, under Roman bondage, they needed to go to the religious court needed to go to a Roman court. Let me just tell you a few things about the religious court. Again, just some groundwork so that we are all clear on how things go. They're actually quite, I don't know, I can't think of a good adjective, quite a good court system that they had in their day. Really quite a sound system. Among other things, I'm going to give you 3 things about the religious system, religious court system. Their trial had to be public. This was part of their way that they conducted themselves. If you were committing a crime against Jewish law, then you were allowed to be tried. You were to be tried in such a way that other people could give voice to what's going on. Other people could see. Other people could respond. It was a public thing. Although the public was not in charge of the trial, they were allowed to be present. The second thing is the accused were allowed a defense, much like our court system today. That the accused was not brought forward and witnesses came forward and whatever evidence came forward and they were just to be silent. They were allowed a time to speak in their defense. They were allowed witnesses. They were allowed, if you will, lawyers. It was very similar to what we picture today in our situation. Third thing I'll tell you, although this is not an exhaustive list, but certainly for our purposes it helps us to see the picture. No one could be convicted in a religious court unless proven guilty by at least 2 or 3 witnesses. And if you know your Old Testament, you know this is just common standard practice. Deuteronomy 19, on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. The hand of the witness shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. The way that they were put to death was by stoning, the Old Testament law. And if you were one of the witnesses, as we talked about during our small group studies of late, if you were a witness to a capital crime, you were the one who picked up a stone to throw it, which made you very, very careful about throwing yourself forward to be a witness. Because you knew that if this came to be, you were the one who was going to be the one who would throw the first stone. Which I don't know how you feel about that, but that would make me a little squirmish. Now, Deuteronomy 19, I want you to understand how serious they took witnesses. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently. So in other words, if a witness comes forward, the witness's word is not taken for granted. They actually go and explore, is this witness a credible witness? The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness, and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brothers. How do you like that? So here I'm a false witness. in a case for a capital punishment crime, and it turns out that I'm lying, and it's discovered that I'm lying, the thing that I was calling for to this accused now falls on my own head, and I'm the one who gets stoned. How do you like that? That keeps you very careful in court to say the right thing. Now, keep in mind, that is, in theory, how religious court was to function. And for the most part, it was an excellent, excellent system. We're now going to pick up our story a little bit. Now that we've had some preliminary comments, we need to begin to understand this trial. So the band of soldiers, John 18, verse 12, and their captain and officers of the Jews arrested Jesus, picking up where we were last week. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now, this is a little bit confusing. Why in the world would they go to Annas? Because he's the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who is the high priest. Why would you go to your father-in-law? What's he got to do with anything? Let me try to explain a little bit of Jewish history without you getting too glazed over. Annas was the legitimate high priest. The high priest was a position that you held for life, and you had to be in the line and the lineage of Aaron. Annas was the legitimate high priest, but Annas, from what we know of secular history, from what we can understand, Annas overstepped his bounds. In fact, what we think has happened is that Annas actually put people to death without Roman approval. Rome came in and took over, and Annas said, forget you, we live under God, we'll do what we want. And the Romans didn't like Annas doing what he did. And so the Romans came in and turfed Annas out of his position, his legitimate position as high priest. And they appointed a high priest, said, you get a new high priest. So Annas had 5 sons and 1 son-in-law. And they took turns rotating so that Annas was actually still an authority and in power. It was kind of like, if you'll allow me to put this in a very human terms, it's kind of like the mafia. There was a boss, and there was all these other little bosses who all did what the big boss really said. And what the big boss said, well, that's what we're really going to do. And we might look like we're kingpins, but really we're listening to the Godfather. If you'll pardon me for putting that in such human terms, that's kind of what's going on here. So they come to Annas, first of all, because he is the legitimate high priest, and they want his opinion. But get this. It was Caiaphas, verse 14, who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient, that's a good word we don't use very often, it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. Do you catch the phrase, that little phrase, what they're trying to imply, what John is telling us there? Annas had already decided, Annas had already declared, Caiaphas had already declared that it was really the best thing for everybody if this man would die. He's going to get so popular, he's going to be so big, it's going to bring threat to our little regime that we've got going on here. He might overthrow a Jewish thing we've got going. I mean, you saw him in the temple, how he turned over things, and people were upset. And they were upset, by the way, because Annas ran the temple, and so Annas was losing money when Jesus went in there and did that. And they're looking at this man and seeing a revolutionary and saying, it is expedient, it is better if we just put that man to death rather than have him disrupt our whole system. Now, they are completely sidestepping any sense of justice, any sense of a trial. They have actually already reached the conclusion that they want. They have reached the sentence that they're looking for, and all they're looking for now is a crime to match the sentence that they've already decided. That's the situation that Jesus is in. The high priest, that's Annas, then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Now remember, when you come into the court system, it is incumbent upon the court to tell you what you're guilty of. But that's not what happens here. It's incumbent upon the court to tell you what you're guilty of and then to bring evidence forward to show that they're right. That's not what happens here. In fact, what happens here is the high priest questions Jesus, pulls him in and said, okay, what have you done wrong? Speak, talk to you about yourself. This is completely, if I can say it this way, completely illegal. This is unfair, unjust, And it is not the way their court system works. And all they were looking for is for Jesus to somehow trip himself up. Tell us about your disciples. Tell us what they're planning. Tell us their little scheme. Tell us your little revolution that you've got going. Tell them what they're doing right now. Tell us how many sharpened swords do you have. Tell us about your teaching. Tell us about what you're talking about yourself. Tell us if you're a king. Tell us about. They were looking for Jesus to say something to incriminate himself, which, can I tell you, in their court was illegal. You could never say anything in their court to incriminate yourself. Any testimony that you gave of yourself was inadmissible in a Jewish court. It would make sense. Supposing my son committed a crime, I come forward and to protect him, I say, I did it, and I confess it, and I tell what I did. My testimony can never be the means by which I am found guilty. My testimony is by virtue of the fact that anybody can lie. Your testimony is never admissible in court, but that's what they're looking for with Jesus. It's completely illegal. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. Now here's the situation. Here's a man bound, standing before his judges, his accusers. What's he going to say? He says to them, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues in the temple where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Do you know what he's saying? Where are the one, the two, the three witnesses? I have said nothing in private. You would have no trouble finding witnesses for this situation right here. We're in court, aren't we? Where are your witnesses? I have said nothing that you should have a difficulty finding witnesses to testify for the evidence that you're looking for. And he's very politely pointing out to them, what you're doing here is completely illegal. I have said nothing in secret. Verse 21, why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. Jesus is basically saying, I would like, please, a legal trial. When he said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, is that how you answer the high priest? You can almost see that tension in that moment. They know what they're doing is wrong. They're standing before Jesus. They're trying to get him to say something to incriminate himself, and he reminds them of how this should function. And now they're completely embarrassed that this lowlife would try to put them in their place. They know in their hearts he's right. And they respond physically. Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered, if what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me? They have no answer to that. Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Strike one, nothing, no evidence came forward. They still have no case. They still don't know what they're doing. They've already reached the conclusion that it's expedient that one man should die. But we're not interested in evidence. We're not interested in hearing truth. We just want to find what we already have concluded is true. Don't bother me with all facts and insignificant things. I have already decided what I've already decided. Can I tell you that there are people that reach the same conclusion about Jesus today? They're not interested in listening to what he has to say about himself. They're not willing to go to witnesses or to find evidence. They've already reached the conclusion. Just get rid of him. We don't need him in our culture. We don't need him in our schools. It doesn't matter who he is. I don't want to listen to it. I don't want to learn about it. I don't want to even look at evidence to find out he might be the Son of God. I don't even care. Just kill him. Just shut him up. Just put him to death. They've already reached a conclusion without even being willing to look at the evidence. We will always face that in our culture. Now he comes before Caiaphas. Just a couple verses to give you a sense of the scene. Those who seized him led him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and elders had gathered. So Caiaphas is not alone. Second thing we learn in Luke 22, verse 54, then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. Now I didn't mention this, but no court is allowed to be taken place unless it's in the hall of justice. It's to be done in public, in daylight, and in the hall of justice. And here we have it at night, in private, in Caiaphas' house. Illegal on every front. And now, Matthew 26. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. They'd already reached a conclusion. They're just looking now for evidence that matches that conclusion, but they found none. Now, I don't know how it is that this little sentence, those 4 words, but they found none, can be so easily sidestepped and stepped over when we listen to secular media that tell us that Jesus got caught up in a revolution and he himself was found guilty and whatever they will tell you, because Scripture is very clear that no matter what they looked for in this man, they found nothing wrong. He was innocent at every count. Though many false witnesses came forward, at last 2 came forward and said, this man said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. Can I just say, ooh, that's pretty scary. This man he said something. Ooh, like, big deal. That's the best they could come up with, was something that he said. And what he said, so, there's no crime in making a claim, true or false. There's no crime in those words. That is the best that they had to try and pin something on him. Now you remember, you must have minimum two witnesses for someone to be put to death of a capital crime. And so they're desperately looking for witnesses. This man said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. And the high priest stood up and said, have you no answer to make? What is it these men are testifying against you? And Jesus doesn't say anything because what's there to say? In fact, if you look, Mark 14 tells us this version. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. Some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, we've heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands. But even about this, their testimony did not agree. I don't know if you caught the difference between the two. Let me just put them up so you can see them back to back. When witnesses come in, they obviously don't come in listening to the other witness. One witness testifies and the other guy's sitting out, in the hall or whatever, so that he's not jaded, he's not influenced, he doesn't hear what somebody else said. So this man speaks, he leaves, another witness comes in, unbeknownst to what has gone on before, and he gives his version of what has taken place. And here's the problem. Matthew records one, Mark records the other. This is what we've got. This man said, I am able to destroy the temple. Mark records that the man said, we heard him say, I will destroy. So on the one hand, guess what I can do? I am able to destroy. The other one said, I'm going to destroy. I have a revolution happening. Another one said, first one, Matthew 26, said, and I will rebuild it in 3 days. I will rebuild the same temple. I'm able to destroy it, and I can rebuild it. It's like a big brag. Mark, we have, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days I'm going to build a different temple, another temple, and I'm not even going to use my hands. Two completely different things. That is the closest they've come to anything to bring against Jesus. That's all they've got. Doesn't matter. They're moving forward. Before Caiaphas, Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, you have said so. But I tell you, and then he quotes from Daniel, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robes, which he's obligated to do in the presence of blasphemy. He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? I'll tell you what further witnesses you need, because with the testimony of a criminal, you can never put somebody to death. By their own testimony, it's never evidence. You need two witnesses. I haven't got two witnesses, Caiaphas is thinking. He's throwing up his hands, so he's being dramatic. He's trying to sway the crowd. He's just trying to just throw the thing in his favor. What witnesses do we need? Why are we bothering? He gets all dramatic and corny. And what further witnesses do we need? You've heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? And he answered, he deserves death. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Completely outside of the system, entirely illegal, without any evidence, without any crime. So they need the approval of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin are 23 men, each town, minimum of 23 men. No, it is 23 men. Excuse me, a minimum town of 150 gets 23 men to make up the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin's an odd number so that when there's a vote, it will never be a tie. The Sanhedrin are the ones who will finally decide how the case will be, how it will proceed. And they are the ones who will ultimately bring the verdict. This is what happens. Well, I got to tell you this before I tell you that. Read that. The way that the Sanhedrin works is when your sentence takes place, your crime is to be, or rather your punishment is to take place on the third day. Are you guys bored with this? I thought this was really interesting. I enjoyed myself. So here's what happens. You commit your crime, you go to trial. Your trial is on one day. The next day, nothing's allowed to happen. The morning of the third day, they convene and decide if you, in fact, are guilty. If they had any second thoughts on that day of rest. If any other witnesses came forward that would bear testimony that would undo what they have decided. And they reach a conclusion, yep, he is guilty, yep, he should die. And that's the system. Here's what happened. The morning came. So this has happened through the night, by the way, which to remind you was an illegal gathering. All the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. That's it. Bam. They bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate the governor. Everyone in favor? Yeah, we're in favor. Okay, let's go. That was it. Bam. Completely, entirely sidestepping what took place. Totally illegal. And so now they have decided, they've reached a conclusion. They still have no evidence. That's besides the point. We're all in agreement. One man should die for the sake of the whole people. Let's just get this thing done. So they bring him before a Roman court because that's what they need to have happen. They led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. I have this in here because I think this is just an interesting statement on their own hearts. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled but could eat the Passover. As a Jewish person, they were not to enter the home of a Gentile. That was not the Jewish law. That was just their own rules. They did not know what Gentile people would be doing, how they might have been defiled, and if they go into that home, they could become defiled if they touched something that was unclean or they didn't know, and then therefore they wouldn't. They'd have a 7-day waiting period of purification and a whole rigmarole, and they wouldn't be able to have Passover. So rather than risk it, they stay outside of Pilate's house. Now, does that strike you as hypocritical? Is that crazy to you? We can't go in there because we might be defiled. They've just done everything they've done to Jesus, illegally, under the table, in their own heart of hearts, hate him to the nth degree. We just want him dead, and here we are, putting on the guise that we're religious. We can't do that because we don't want to be defiled. Are you kidding me? That is religion at its extreme, at its best. That's religion right there. That's exactly what it produces. An outward appearance and an inward filth. So they come before Pilate. Pilate went outside to them. They can't come in. What accusation do you bring against this man? So this is one of the best statements in all of the trial. Verse 30, they answered him, if this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you. Did anybody have a problem with that? What kind of an answer is that? What crime has he done? We wouldn't have brought him here if he wasn't bad. Okay? So there, and stuff like that. So you take him and that. Yeah. I mean, they've got nothing to say, so they just babble on with some wacky kind of, how dare you accuse us of doing something, if we wouldn't have done this, all right, if he wasn't bad. I meant to, all right? It's just juvenile ridiculous. Pilate said to them, take him yourself. Get this is fascinating. Take him yourself and judge him by your own law. Pilate already is like, I don't even want to deal with this. You people are crazy. Take him yourself and deal with him yourself. Do you realize what just happened? Jesus was actually given the Jews were given the legal authority to take Jesus and do what they wanted with him right there. They were given the right to go and proceed with their own law and stone him to death. They could have grabbed him and been done with him their own way. This is fascinating, but they don't. The Jews say to him, It is not lawful. Oh, suddenly the law matters. How intriguing. It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, which is true. It was not lawful because they're under Roman rule. And suddenly, we need you to do it. Now, all of this, here's a glimmer of an understanding of what's going on. This is not Jesus caught up in some accident. This is entirely a design of God. This was to fulfill the word that the Jews even give him back to Pilate, saying, we're not going to do it, you do it. The whole reason was that so that Jesus, the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. That even in that, the sovereign hand of God was making sure that Jesus genuinely did die by Gentile hands. And suddenly those passages in the Old Testament are going to make sense. Why is he saying on Psalm 24, my God, why have you forsaken me? For years Jewish people read that and said, what is he talking about? In Isaiah 53, we'll look on the one we have pierced. Pierced, what does that mean? What are we reading? Who is this man of sorrows, acquainted with grief? What are we looking at? And all of a sudden, the entire Old Testament makes sense because at this exchange, the Jewish people insist that the Gentiles take Jesus. There is somebody behind the entire scene overseeing what is taking place. So Pilate, the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, now, this is now still the exchange with Pilate outside of his door. We found this man misleading our nation. This has nothing to do with building a temple or tearing it down in 3 days. All of a sudden they got a whole new story. We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar. There's a trump card. Now the Romans, what is that? The Romans are, Pilate is under Caesar's rule. And so they're trying in some way to put a little niggly thing in Pilate's mind. You can't trust this guy. He's planning a revolution against Caesar. He's going all the way to the top. This guy's a dangerous one. He's scheming something big to overthrow him. And so Pilate's like, well, and now if I let this guy go, and it's true, my head's going to roll. And they knew exactly what buttons to push to get Pilate's attention, even though there was really nothing that they had. So he says himself, he is Christ, a king. Ooh. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus to him and said, are you the king of the Jews? Now here's a little dilemma. If Jesus answered, no, I'm not the king of the Jews, then he is denying his kingship. That he is the king of all the universe. That every human heart that beats is called to bow before him in submission, before his authority. That we are called to his kingship and his rule over our lives and our hearts. He is the king. He can't deny that he's the king. But if he says, yes, I am the king, he knows that Pilate is going to think that he's talking in human terms. That he's somehow a king of a kingdom sitting on a throne with subjects in a physical realm. And that's not true. So he can't say no and deny his kingship. He can't say yes and confuse Pilate. So he's got this dilemma. So here's his answer. Jesus answered him, do you say this of your own accord? Or did others say it to you about me? In other words, are you asking me on human terms? Have you said this on yourself? Are you asking me about whether this is a human kingdom you're asking about? Or are you talking about what the Jews say? Are you talking about some spiritual thing? Some religious thing? Pilate answered him, am I a Jew? And right away he gives away. I don't care anything about your kingship on earth. I'm not talking about that. Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Again, Jesus is not obligated to answer that question. It's an illegal question. He cannot be convicted of his own testimony, and so he doesn't answer. Verse 36, Jesus answered. It's got nothing to do with this question, and he says this. My kingdom, now you know that I'm a spiritual king. You're not talking about earthly things. Let me tell you about my kingdom. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world. It's not out of a world system. It's not an earthly kingdom that you're thinking of. Pilate said to him, so you are a king. Jesus responds, for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world. Now, before I read these words, I have to just make sure you underline them in your own mind. I've mentioned these words before, and I'll do my best not to go on at length about them, because these are some of the most profound words that Jesus ever spoke. And if they don't rattle your bones, you need to do something with your head and try to figure out why you don't understand what he's saying and how profound this is. Because Jesus makes this statement, I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. I am the one who has the truth. And if you want the truth, you're going to be listening to me. Nobody else. Me. I am the truth. This man is either Looney Tunes or he truly is God. And you know what? I think that's what Pilate begins to think. Because Pilate's response to Jesus is to just respond the way our culture responds to Jesus. Anyone who listens to you is of the truth? You can't know truth. One man's truth is another man's fiction. What's good for you is good for you. What's good for me is good for me. Everybody's truth is everybody's truth. There's no such thing as absolute truth. What is truth? And all of a sudden he's like, oh, this guy is crazy. He's out of his head. Whatever. You can be philosophical and wacky all you want, but there's no crime here. What is truth? There's no truth. Can I tell you something? There are a lot of people who will come all the way to investigating Jesus, curious about Jesus, finding out about Jesus, and the moment they find out that there's exclusivity to the truth of Jesus, to his claims to be the truth, the way, the life, all of a sudden, you can't do that. You can't know that. You can't be sure about that. And immediately cut off any exploration of who this man is. It's our culture. It's what we live in. It's what we face. It's exactly what took place in Jesus' day. So you know what happened. He comes before Herod because Pilate has got nothing to do with him. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. I'm jumping into a bit of a context. When he heard that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. Now, just a quick understanding here, that when you could be tried of a crime, you could be tried where your crime took place or where you were from. And Pilate didn't want to deal with it when he found out he's from Galilee. Well, guess what? Herod happens to be from Galilee, over Galilee. Herod's in the neighborhood. You can take him, Herod. Herod, verse 8, when Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad. For he had long desired to see him because he had heard about him. He was hoping to see some sign done by him. Herod, this Herod, is the same Herod, by the way, who put John the Baptist to death and had him beheaded. It's the same Herod who, when he heard that Jesus was on the scene, believed that Jesus was John the Baptist, whom he had beheaded, come back to life and doing miracles. The same superstitious Herod who wasn't really sure what to make of Jesus or of John the Baptist, who felt guilty because John the Baptist made him feel guilty because he knew he was guilty. And he was always curious to find and see Jesus, and finally Jesus is in front of him. And all he wants is to see some sign. Could you do a little magic trick for me? Just do one of those cool things that I heard that you do. I'm not interested in your case. I'm not going to talk to you about, who you are. I don't want to know anything. I just want to see you do something cool. Could you just do something for me? Can you just, come on. That's his only idea. Verse 9. So we questioned him at some length, but Jesus, as he made no answer. Jesus had no response. You want to just think that I'm your entertainment? I've got nothing to say to you. There's people that look at Jesus this way. And they come before him and all they want is what they can get out of it. I'm happy to go to church as long as the music suits me. I'm happy to go to church or do this Jesus thing as long as there's food involved. I'm happy to be there as long as it's not an inconvenient time. I'm happy as long as I get something and it makes me happy and it looks good for me and it's entertainment. Woo! I'm in on it. I'm there. It's good for me. But they're not interested in Jesus on any real level. They're not interested in exploring who he is. They're not really going to dig down and find out what his call on their lives. The spirit of Herod lives on. So Herod has no response to him. So he comes back, and he's suddenly Pilate's problem. Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to him, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people, and after examining him, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod." So there you go. 2 for 2. Guess what? You're out of luck, is what Pilate said. For he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. So here, I'll do you a favor. Let's give him a little spanking. Let's humiliate him. We'll embarrass him, and we'll let him go. Okay, how about that? So Pilate took Jesus, had him flogged. Soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns, put it on his head, arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourself and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. Wait a cotton-picking minute, Pilate's thinking. This man said, "I have a kingdom that's not of this world." You people tell me that he said he's the Son of God. I didn't hear that before. Wait a minute. Verse 9, he entered the headquarters again. He said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus gave him no answer. Verse 10, Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Pilate was used to seeing people cower before him. "No, please, no, not to this sentence. No, no, no." Jesus is just standing there silent. And Pilate is indignant. "I need a response. How dare you just stand there? Don't you know who I am?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given you from above. Therefore he has delivered me over to you as the greater sin." And the little light bulbs come on in Pilate's head. What? You mean all this time there's something bigger going on than just you're caught up in some insurrection and some people don't like you? You mean I'm only here because something is behind the scene putting me in this position and you in this position? And wait a cotton-picking minute. And all of a sudden Pilate believes, I believe. Pilate knows he really is the Son of God. Pilate steps out. Verse 12, from then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man," and they put the nails to Pilate, "we're going to tattle on you. We're going to tell Caesar that you let a rebel go, that he's a revolutionary, and you didn't keep him. Your head's going to roll. You're not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So Pilate is caught. Pilate is caught. When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat him down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was about the preparation. It was a day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6 hours, 6 a.m. He said to the Jews, "Behold, your king." They cried out, "Away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate even knew who he was. The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar. We don't want anyone ruling over our lives. We're not interested in submitting to Christ. We're not interested in his truth. We don't want to hear anything about him. Just get rid of him." And the world cries on with the same 3 words. We just let him die. Just crucify him. Just crucify him. They want nothing to do with him. They will never submit. They want nothing of his authority. So we delivered him over to be crucified. You know, there's people who come that close. There's people that come that close. They even recognize who Jesus is. But the cost is too high. Pilate would have lost his job, perhaps his life, if he had not done. And he felt the pressure. And he couldn't give in. He couldn't give in. I'm not justifying it. I'm telling you why he did what he did. He was wrong. He couldn't pay the price of absolutely coming forward and declaring this man is the Son of God and he should go free. Do you know how often that happens? People come so close to Jesus, but the cost is too high. They want enough of him that they can feel good and believe they've got some way to heaven, but they're not going to lay down their lives for him. They're not going to pay the price. They're not going to pay the cost of following him. The trial of Jesus is a trial of travesty, illegal on every front. Some people just want rid of him in spite of the evidence. We're not interested in evidence. Evidence is irrelevant. It's expedient that he dies. Just get rid of him. Some people, like Caiaphas, they go through the motions of religion, but there's really nothing inside them. And they'll come to church and they'll say, you know, on the outside, we need to look all holy and holy, but inside, I couldn't care less if my heart is not right. They've got this religious veneer, and they're good with Jesus on those terms. As long as it's a religious thing, but don't mess up my life. Some people, like Herod, just look at Jesus, and all they want is what they can get from him. Their own entertainment, or their own satisfaction, and their own purposes, their own ends. That's all they're interested in. And on that level, he's good. He's fine. He's fine. I'll have him in my life. I'll be a part of him, but don't take him too seriously. Don't get radical about him. They want a Jesus that suits their needs. For some people like Pilate, they get right to the edge, and they realize who he really is. But I'm not going to commit to him. I'm not going to surrender to him. I'm not going to call him my Lord. But Christ demands, by virtue of who he is, the Son of God, the innocent Lamb of God, who died to take away the sin of the world, the King of all the universe, he demands that all men everywhere repent and bow to him in submission. Full submission, because he is the King. He is the Lord. And he demands it of us.